Before this video begins, I would just like to thank my Asbantium level patron, Fallon Cortez. Thank you for supporting the channel. It's a cold November night in 1987 Chicago as you settle in to watch another airing of part 1 of the beloved Doctor Who episode, Horror of Fang Rock. However, 11 minutes in, just as you're getting invested in the rich atmosphere of the story, this happens. For 90 seconds you sit there stunned until it's suddenly all over. Did that really happen? Did you imagine it in some late night haze of insomnia? You run to your phone, no longer caring about Doctor Who. You call up the station, desperate for answers, only to find out that you're one of many, and even the station doesn't know what happened. Little do you know, not only have you just witnessed the most infamous 90 seconds in Doctor Who history, but also one of TV's greatest unsolved mysteries. This is the story of the Max Headroom incident.
So what did you think about the whole thing?
Very funny.
So let's backtrack a bit. During the 1970s to the 1990s, affiliates of the American Broadcasting Network, PBS, elected to air episodes of Doctor Who to meet the demand of local viewers who wanted to watch the show, in exchange for donating to the stations to keep them running. Thus, a lot of these broadcast stations across America began buying and broadcasting Jon Pertwee and Tom Baker episodes as early as 1975, with donations allowing them to add new seasons. This created an effect often called the Tom Baker loop, because they would constantly air episodes until they reached the most recent one they had in their libraries, before then returning to Season 12's Robot and beginning anew. Which is why Tom Baker's Fourth Doctor is so particularly well known by American fans of the show. An interesting side note is that these PBS stations eventually actually had the first airing of the 5 Doctors on the actual 20th anniversary of Doctor Who, rather than the BBC, which aired it later. Quite impressive when you think about it, and shows you just how much of a market there really was for these stories. And naturally, despite having more of the library by the time 1987 rolled around, Tom Baker stories still reigned supreme, leading to constant repeats of Fourth Doctor stories like Horror of Fang Rock. This story is absolutely incredible, by the way. It's such a delightfully atmospheric and moody, claustrophobic story, loosely based on the real-life mystery of the Flannan Isles lighthouse disappearances. I made a video about it and other Doctor Who real experiences, so go check it out. Horror at Fang Rock, despite its lovably dated alien jellyfish effects, is understandably a classic story beloved by fans and considered one of the best classic Who horror narratives. But in America, its reputation is more of accidental infamy because of that one fateful November night. At around 11:20 PM on November the 22nd on PBS station WTTW, the episode was suddenly interrupted by this disorienting, distorted and chaotic 90-second sequence of a figure dressed as sci-fi character Max Headroom. The audio is barely legible, but he begins by making a comment about nerds, proceeds to call sports commentator Chuck Swirsky a frickin' liberal, parodies a Coca-Cola commercial, raises his middle finger at the camera, sings "Your Love is Fading," apparently from the Temptations song "I Know I'm Losing You," pretends to defecate, and lastly gets spanked by a female figure in a French maid outfit while crying out, "Oh no, they're coming to get me. Ah, make it stop." With this, the 19-second interruption fades into static and then back into Horror of Fang Rock, leaving audiences stunned and confused. There was no clear message or motive, nor any indication as to who was behind it. In fact, the incident could have gone on for much longer if the ones responsible hadn't ended it themselves. In later interviews and news reports, WTTW workers Anders Yorkom and Paul Rizzo both admitted that technicians were unable to do anything to stop the signal takeover, due to no engineers being on duty at Sears Tower at that time, where the broadcast towers were. Yorkom even said, "By the time our people began looking into what was going on, it was over." And interestingly, this wasn't even the first Max Headroom incident of the night. 2 hours earlier on fellow local station WGN TV, a different intrusion took place during the 9 o'clock news. There was no audio for this interruption, simply a garbled and staticky sound as the camera swayed from side to side, with the Max Headroom figure seemingly bouncing up and down. However, unlike the later, more infamous incident, this one was pretty quickly fixed by engineers changing the frequency of the news broadcast to get it back on track.
Well, if you're wondering what's happened, so am I.
First of all, something I need to explain is Max Headroom itself, especially since in modern day, most people would probably recognize it more from this incident or, I don't know, the music video for Eminem's Rap God. In fact, with the amount of parodies and references out there, you almost certainly know Max Headroom through cultural osmosis alone. But the original, actual Max Headroom was the product of George Stone, Annabelle Jankel, and Rocky Morton, the latter of whom were also responsible for the terrible live-action Mario movie, by the way. Max Headroom was introduced in April 1985 in a Channel 4 movie titled Max Headroom 20 Minutes into the Future. It sees fictional journalist Edison Carter's mind turned into an AI program, which develops the Max Headroom personality and becomes a digital TV host. The character is distinctly satirical, an attempt to highlight the out-of-touch American TV hosts, whilst also being distinctly anti-capitalist by challenging the cyberpunk corporations of his world. Which, of course, makes it all the more ironic that in the real world he became the global spokesperson for New Coke, the awfully received Coca-Cola drink. Through his two series, The Max Headroom Show and Max Headroom, the character became an iconic staple of 80s culture in both the UK and America, especially because of his distinctively uncanny appearance and glitchy persona. In fact, many people genuinely did believe he was computer generated, despite being actor Matt Frewer in prosthetics. After the UK Max Headroom ended, an American successor started airing just a couple of weeks later on March 31st, 1987. Oh, and just as a side note, an episode for it almost was written by good old George R.R. Martin. It's crazy to think of a time where he was actually a writer, and not the most frustrating creative genius in the world of fiction writing because he can't goddamn finish Winds of Winter. Max Headroom ran throughout 1987, with Season 1 and half of Season 2 all airing within that year. In fact, Season 2 Episode 5, Whack It, featuring Bill Mayer of all people, aired on October 16th, meaning it's little surprise that the character was relevant enough to be the face of the November 22nd incident. But how did this intrusion even happen? Well, unlike televisions nowadays, which, still exist, stations at the time used analog transmissions, not digital ones. This required sending a signal from a broadcasting tower to each individual TV set, which had an aerial to receiver and display the visual and audio transmission. However, because of this method, it was possible to send a more powerful signal to the broadcast towers to hijack it, allowing for this interruption to take place. It's not an easy thing to do, and it's completely impossible now. In fact, in 1987, such a signal interception would have required significant technical ability and transmitting power, leading to many people believing it might have even been an inside job by a disgruntled worker, much like the infamous Captain Midnight intrusion a year prior, in which electrical engineer and business owner John R. McDougall hijacked an HBO signal for 4.5 minutes to protest the cost of satellite channels. But unlike this famous incident, which cemented McDougall as a folk hero among many, there was no clear motive or identity behind the Max Headroom incident. Even to this day, nobody really knows what the point of it was. When you look at the garbled contents of the signal interruption, there are a few things that stand out, mainly the cultural references because of their recognisability. There's still no clear message. Despite demeaning Chuck Swirsky as a liberal, nothing else in the clip is politically inclined. If anything, it feels distinctly anti-corporate instead, in fitting with the original premise of Max Headroom himself. Those New Coke advertisements are mocked, as is the wider WGN brand of which he implies he is defecating on. And despite it being a stretch, you could read the "Your love is fading" lyric as a condemnation of corporate interests replacing creative love and effort across global media. Potentially, this is the relevance of Clutch Cargo within the message, a 1959 show that very ambitiously used the new Synchro Vox filming method of superimposing talking lips onto a cartoon. It was a cost-cutting strategy, but something distinctly new, and Clutch Cargo was the first animation to use the technique, displaying a want to tell ambitious stories despite having limited resources. A prime example of a love for creativity and innovation instead of complacent corporate cynicism. The focus on WGN specifically suggests a personal grudge against the station, but it's entirely possible that the transmission was simple bravado from hackers who wanted to simply prove that it was possible. In the wake of the Captain Midnight incident, it wouldn't be surprising if fellow technically capable hackers were inspired to follow suit, even if they had no message to send at all. Indeed, I personally feel that the Max Headroom incident was simply a hack for the sake of hacking, and broadcasting something intentionally incoherent and shocking as a form of absurdist performance art, simply making a statement that it can be done. The random phrases, crude actions, and fetishistic ending all point towards either an inside joke or bet within a small technically grifted group, or a deliberate attempt to create indecipherable performance art of being provocative and shocking for the sake of being shocking. The initial news interruption almost feels like a test run, a dress rehearsal before the grand interruption of Doctor Who, a show primarily watched by students at the time. The shocking ending feels like a conscious mockery of the lack of consequences for such an interruption, almost laughing off the idea that they are coming to spank him for misbehaving. The fact that there's no clear motive or meaning behind the incident has always been one of its most notable and mysterious elements. It's similar to the UK's own most infamous broadcast hijacking, the Southern Television incident on November 26, 1977, almost an exact decade before, in which a voice claimed to represent the Ashtar Galactic Command and delivered a message for humanity to put down its weapons and achieve a higher state of evolution. To this day, there's no explanation of that interruption, and it similarly feels like it could simply be a case of proving the capability of hijacking signals for personal bragging rights or performance art. Sometimes the only meaning of art is its mere existence. And sometimes, people just have way too much skill and just misuse it. I mean, it was all that stuff with that Tifa thing in Italy a few years ago. Just people are gonna just do whatever they want. When McDougal staged his protest, the Federal Communications Commission, or FCC, quite quickly managed to track him down despite his Captain Midnight pseudonym. He faced a fine of up to $100,000 and 1 year in prison if convicted, leading to him entering a plea bargain for just a $5,000 fine and 1 year of unsupervised probation instead. However, to this day, nobody has been able to track down the perpetrators of the Max Headroom incident in the same way. Despite experts triangulating the signal to having to be within the line of sight of both the WGN and WTTW broadcast towers, nobody was caught and nobody has ever claimed responsibility for the hijacking. To the extent that the statute of limitations has long since passed, and even if the identities are revealed, no punishment can even take place anymore. Many people still believe it was the work of a disgruntled employee. Some attribute it to the underground hacker community of the city, but one of the most compelling unofficial investigations came on, of all places, Reddit 15 years ago. Because they're always so good at investigations. We did it, Reddit. User BPOAG, I'm just going to call him BPOG, it's close enough, claimed he believed he knew who was responsible, suggesting they were friends at the time. However, these two suspects were ultimately, and thankfully anonymously, ruled out. Although BPOG's attempts to investigate the mystery did at least cement the likelihood of it being an inside job, having spoken to many engineers and technicians who had been working in the Chicago broadcasting community at the time. With the information he and Rick Klein of the Museum of Classic Chicago Television were able to glean, there was almost no chance an amateur or group of amateurs could have possessed the hardware possible to stage the incident. Despite it being over 10 years ago, and the Reddit user having since distanced himself from being involved in the search, wanting to move on to other things, because it's been over 10 years, he and Klein were by far the most dedicated and successful investigators of this incident, to the extent that they even supposedly own a much clearer quality version of the interruption, from which many different identifiable features could be gleaned. But as the Reddit user admits, it would be a bad idea to identify the hacker. Not because of the criminal implications, but because of the legacy and infamy of the incident. The Max Headroom incident is considered one of the greatest and most mysterious hacks of all time. For 90 seconds, an American broadcaster was completely helpless as a still unknown hacker held immense power only to make a complete mockery of the situation with no message and no purpose, simply broadcasting garbled, shocking content for the love of the game. Max is therefore considered a hero within the hacking community for this intrusion, especially for getting away completely free and remaining anonymous even 30 years later. To identify him or his group would be stripping away that legacy and cheapening what's seen as such an incredible achievement. As I said, this is one of the most infamous hacks of all time, and even those in the community would never want to know who did it and how, because it's like the magician's code. You don't talk about it. Even if you know who Max is, you don't tell anyone because it goes against the spirit of the community and the importance of anonymity. The only person or people allowed to expose the perpetrators of the Max Headroom incident are the ones who did it themselves. So as it stands, the incident has a very strong legacy and impact. It regularly receives coverage on YouTube and other websites. People are still trying to theorize its meaning, and it has even been referenced in other pieces of media, like, the cartoon Space Ghost Coast to Coast. It's incredibly infamous, and its nature as an unsolved mystery will always keep it so. Doctor Who is no stranger to interruptions of TV weirdness. I mean, there's the more accidental, infamous Graham Norton interruption during 2005's Rose, and another less intrusive during 2010's Time of Angels. Like seriously, he interrupted it twice somehow. But nothing could ever surpass the weirdness of that 90 seconds in the middle of Horror of Fang Rock Part 1. To this day, the list of questions is lengthy. Who did it? How did they do it? Why did they do it? And why was a random Doctor Who rerun the chosen target? It's such an incredible, impossible to recreate incident that has always fascinated me deeply. There's just something about it, how crass and off-putting it is, how distorted it is, how giant the Max Headroom head is. It's deeply compelling, if a lot less creepy than people often suggest. It's not really some scary, chilling interruption, it's basically a pre-internet shitpost prank. I mean, come on, you can't really be scared of this. Although I guess it was the pole clutch in 80s, so maybe that makes more sense. I always find it quite strange but cool that Doctor Who will be forever linked directly to this whole incident. Every time someone wants to watch the clip, they'll have to see that brief snippet of Horror of Fang Rock, which is just kind of cool to me. And I guess actually when you think about it, there's sort of a symbolism you can draw from it, given that Horror of Fang Rock is all about this entity blending in and, picking people off one by one, and it's so mysterious because it can be anyone. And then you have the Max Headroom incident, which that could be anyone. Definitely incidental, but quite fun. But yes, that's all for the most infamous 90 seconds in Doctor Who history. Who do you think was responsible for the hijacking? And why did they do it? What do you think the message was? Let me know in the comments, do the usual like, subscribe, hype it up, all that stuff. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye. And I'd just like to thank my Asbantium level patron, Fallon Cortez, my Diamond level patron, Valtar, and all my Gold level patrons, Daniel Shillito, Elliot Hodgkinson, and James Alayula Waterhouse. Thank you for supporting the channel.